Hi, I'm Frankie, your super sassy systemizing specialist. Thanks for tuning in to learn all about invoicing and reconciling in Xero for travel expenses. The expenses, purchases made by Evolve staff and subcontractors while delivering projects for Evolve customers need to be unbilled and recouped from the customer. We do this by taking the expense information entered by staff and contractors using the Xero Expenses app and pushing this information into an invoice to the customer. Also, if a staff member or subcontractor use their own money to purchase an item, the staff member or contractor will need to be repaid for this expense. For Evolve, the bookkeeper will complete the invoice creation and submit it for approval to an Evolve director, who will approve it and send it to the customer. The bookkeeper will also handle all expense transaction reconciliations, both when payment for the expense was made using an Evolve business credit or debit card, and when payment for the expense was made using subcontractors' own money. In cases where subcontractors use their own money to purchase an expense item, they should not also include this expense in their service invoice to Evolve. This is because a bill has already been generated in Xero through the expense app, and this will be used to reimburse the contractor. So, a separate invoice item from the contractor is not required and would be a duplication. A director will be alerted by the bookkeeper that a contractor needs to be reimbursed if the contractor used their own money. And as this will be evident from the outstanding billable expenses report the bookkeeper will run regularly. The director will make the payment from a standard Evolve business account to the contractor based on the amount identified in the expense claim bills. The bookkeeper will then reconcile this payment against the expense bill when the payment is available in the bank feed to be reconciled. The steps in this video outline how all of this should work and what the tasks and actions are for the bookkeeper and the approver director. Now, it all sounds really interesting and I know you can't wait to get into it, but let me just show you a quick overview of the system first. Invoicing and reconciling in Xero for travel expenses. Step 1. Bookkeeper. Invoicing the customer for expenses. Step 2. Approver. Approve and send invoice to customer. Step 3. Bookkeeper. Reconcile expense transaction if an Evolve credit or debit card was used. Step 4. Bookkeeper. Reconcile expense transaction if staff or contractors' own funds were used. Step 5, bookkeeper and approver confirm that the expense bill is paid. And step 6, bookkeeper reconcile the payment of customer invoice. Okay, that sounds pretty easy. Well, let me guide you in more detail about each step in this system. So step 1, bookkeeper. Invoicing the customer for the expenses. So log into Xero and click Accounts, then Expense Claims. In the All Expenses tab, locate any newly approved expense claims for a particular customer. For each of these expense claims, do the following to make the expense claim receipt image available to upload to the invoice. So click on the 3 dots on the right and select View Bill. Click the file icon and then click on the image file title to open the image. At the bottom right of the open image, click the download icon and select download to push the image to your hard drive. Usually you'll see this downloaded file at the bottom of your screen. Click the arrow and select show in folder. Click rename to rename the image file. All receipt images taken in Xero Expenses app are default named scaled receipt. This cannot be changed at the time of taking the receipt picture. So we need to change the name manually to ensure that the customer can identify the receipt images attached to the invoice. The new name must follow this naming convention. Item purchased - company purchased from - Evolve customer dash, first name and last initial of the staff member who made the expense claim, dash, date of purchase. Here's an example. Now it's the time to create the invoice for the customer so Evolve can recoup the expenses that were incurred while delivering the program for this customer. So head back into the Xero screen and select Accounts, then Sales. Click New to create a new invoice. Start typing the customer name in the To box and select the correct customer from the list. Click on the blue text link that says, in our example, 7 billable expenses can be added. The number of billable expenses that can be added will change depending on the number of approved expenses to be on-billed to the customer. This link is situated underneath the To box. In the window that opens, select the expenses that need to be on-billed to the customer in this invoice and click Add Items. You'll see that the details from the expense claim now have been populated in the line items in this invoice. Magic! Now, head to the File icon at the top right of the invoice screen, click this and then select Upload Files. Navigate to the location where the receipt image or images that you renamed earlier are located. It's likely to be in your Downloads folder in Windows Explorer, and then select the file or files. You may have renamed multiple expense claim receipts for the customer, in which case you may want to upload all of these renamed image files at this point to attach the invoice. Now, click on the gear icon and select Include with Invoice to attach the renamed receipt image to the invoice. These will now be sent to the customer along with the invoice. Complete the rest of the invoice fields as usual and include the accounts in Xero for the expense claim items. Any tax field changes required, date due, and so on. The image here shows the fields that you have already completed in yellow and the remaining fields in pink as a guide. Once the fields are complete, click the arrow next to the Save button and select Save and Submit for approval. This sends the draft invoice to Awaiting Approval tab in the Sales section, where an Evolve director can approve it and email it to the customer. And that's it for invoice creation. So you've successfully created an invoice to recoup expenses from the customer, renamed and attached the associated expense claim receipts, pulled the expense claim information into the invoice and sent it to an Evolve director for approval and sending. Good job! Step 2. Approver. Approve and send invoice to customer. The approver can find invoices awaiting approval in the tab of the same name under Sales in Xero. Open the invoice, check it, and click Approve if you're happy with it. If it requires editing, either provide editing feedback to the bookkeeper or make the edits then and there. And lastly, click Email to send the invoice to the customer. You may have templated email content that you can select in the window that now opens, which you may want to edit. Step 3. Bookkeeper. Reconcile expense transactions, Evolve credit or debit card used. The bookkeeper is also responsible for reconciling the expense transaction. This involves clicking the Reconcile button for the account the expense was paid from when the Evolve credit or debit card was used to pay for an expense. Xero will automatically suggest that a debit credit card transaction for the expense is reconciled against the expense claim bill that is created at the time the staff member entered the expense claim in the Xero Expenses app. Click OK. Step 4. Bookkeeper. Reconcile expense transaction when staff or contractor use their personal funds. So when a staff member or contractor has paid for an expense item of their own funds, Evolve needs to reimburse this person. In this case, until Evolve has paid the staff member contractor back, there will not be a transaction to reconcile in the bank feed. The bookkeeper needs to regularly run the billable expenses outstanding report to identify expenses that have not yet been reconciled and alert an Evolve director to the need to reimburse the staff member or contractor for the expense as applicable. To run this report, select Reports, then All Reports, then the Billable Expenses Outstanding Report. The director must make payment outside of Xero from the Evolve bank account. Once this transaction comes through the bank feed, the bookkeeper reconciles this against the expense bill. This is done in the same way as he or she would do with a bank feed transaction for an expense paid for with an Evolve credit or debit card. It is important that in the case of a subcontractor, they do not also include any expenses they paid for with their own money in their general service invoice to Evolve, as they will have been reimbursed for this expense separately. It is recommended that Evolve manages any expense reimbursement to the contractor separately to their general service invoice because Xero has created a bill for the expense that must be reconciled. And it is much easier if the payment to the contractor for the expense is made separately and not bundled up in their payment for their general service invoice. Step 5. Bookkeeper and Approver. Confirm that the expense bill is paid. Once the expense transaction has been reconciled against the corresponding expense bill in Xero, the expense will show as paid in the expense claims section of Xero. Step 6. Bookkeeper. Reconcile payment of customer invoice. In regard to reconciling the payment by the customer of the invoice sent to them, this is how it's done. Log into Xero and click Reconcile button for the account of the customer pays into. When the payment from the customer is received in the bank account, Xero will match the invoice and payment, allowing you to easily click OK to complete the transaction. And that's it! It's nice and easy to follow. But before I say goodbye, let me just recap on these steps for you. Invoicing and reconciling in Xero for travel expenses. Step 1. Bookkeeper. Invoicing the customer for expenses. Step 2. Approver. Approve and send invoice to customer. Step 3. Bookkeeper. Reconcile expense transaction if an Evolve credit or debit card was used. Step 4. Bookkeeper. Reconcile expense transaction if staff or contractors' own funds were used. Step 5. Bookkeeper and Approver. Confirm that the expense bill is paid. And Step 6. Bookkeeper. Reconcile the payment of customer invoice. So thanks for listening. We hope this system makes reconciling and invoicing customers for your travel expenses a breeze. Oh, and here's a quick suggestion for you. We know your business processes may change, and if that happens, you'll need to update the flowchart, the step-by-step, and the video for your systems. No problem. Just send me an email at hello@thesystemologist.com.au, or you can call the humans on 1300 803879, and we can get this done for you. You may well have some free support hours or rewards points that you could use for this. And if not, we'll sort you out with a super low price to get your systems updated.